You're listening to 94.4FM Salford City Radio, the Friday sports show of your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate on this show to have many exciting guests in the world of sport, top athletes, sports people, footballers, coaches, people who work in the field of psychology. Our segment, we've been speaking to people who are in the field of psychology and related fields. There's some really fascinating guests, and the world's leading people in the field of psychology has shared their insights and expertise on the show, and insight into their thoughts and feelings in areas around mental health and sports psychology. And today we have a really fascinating guest, a student. We had a couple of months ago an interview with Professor Peter Kinderman, who shared some really fascinating insights into his experience and expertise around diagnostic labels, and it was a fascinating conversation. It was a really well received show. It received a lot of good feedback, a lot of positive feedback. People were really fascinated by the show. It's still available to listen to. Today we speak to one of Peter's learners from the University of Liverpool University, I should say, studying psychology. He's been doing some research, some undergraduate research around depression. So it's a bit of a follow-up, I guess, from that to a point, but we'll get some extra insights into the research our guest has been doing today. So Millissa Booth, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you on board, and sort of following on with some of the fascinating insights that Professor Peter Kinderman gave us a few months ago. It really was fascinating. His work has been very influential in the UK and around the world, and really, really fascinating and makes a lot of sense. Tell us about the research that you've been doing with him. Tell us a bit of an insight in terms of what you've been doing.
Yeah, so we basically wanted to follow on with Peter's ideas, which is really the idea that we want to change the way that we think about mental health problems.
Yeah.
And a way of doing this is to essentially change the language that we use when naming these experiences. So, as Peter mentioned, the traditional way of thinking about depression and anxiety is of them as mental illnesses. And this has kind of led us to want to understand our low moods as a genetic condition. And that's kind of followed the idea that, people are anxious because there's something wrong with them, because they're disordered and it's the brains. Mm-hmm. And that's that biomedical viewpoint. But we're not sure that that's necessarily helpful. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's best to think of it in a collective terms, why we get anxious, and trying to close that there's such a distinction between normal and abnormal. And our point really is with this research is that at the moment the language that we're using isn't reflecting that view, it's reflecting that traditional view. So it's more that, it's a serious issue, and we want to change the way that we speak about it, because mental health issues, as we know, are life-changing and extremely distressing.
Absolutely. No, it was really fascinating to sort of speak to Professor Kinderman. I've sort of followed his work for a long while as well, and read some of his. I've read a lot of his sort of research and books as well. I find them really fascinating. In terms of your motivation, yours and Professor Kinderman's motivation for doing the research, what was behind that? You mentioned there, you sort of talked about that briefly, but can you sort of give the listeners a bit of an idea what motivated you guys to do the research?
Well, I think the basic aim of the research was to highlight that a change is needed, and it was kind of that we shared the same thoughts on depression. So, when people are going to the doctors and they're receiving a psychiatric diagnosis, their low mood and depression then becomes major depressive disorder. So, the term disorder itself is medical. It means a dysfunction in our biology. So we're using the language that represents that we have what's normal mental health and that distinction of major depressive disorder. And I'm not sure, that's so helpful. We kind of follow the same belief that depression's best thought of as an experience. And, distress is a normal part of life, it's not abnormal. And that comes from whether it's financial struggles or losing our job or trauma. And in relation to the language and why we wanted to focus on that, it's recognising that terms like disorder represent that way of thinking. And that does have severe consequences. For example, there was an anti-stigma campaign a few years ago with that well-known slogan, mental illness is like any other illness.
Yeah.
And it was kind of thought that would reduce stigma because it's comparing it to a physical illness that, is more accepted. But what actually happened was kind of the reverse. It increased the idea that there's a difference between you and me, and that they're disordered and they have something wrong with their brains. And so we know that the language that we use really does have a knock-on effect. It can prevent people from getting jobs, that way of thinking that, what we are experiencing is incurable, so it has less hope for the future. So it's really the language that we use, it really does matter, and that was the basis for this research. Yeah,
that's really interesting you say, and I guess there's a lot of theories on depression depending on sort of how you see things. You've got cognitive theories, you've got learned helplessness, humanistic theories, behaviourist theories, psychodynamic theories, and obviously we sort of see inflammation, the blood-brain barrier as well is sort of brought up to the monomind theory. I suppose in one sense, and this is one thing I sort of touched on with Professor Kinderman, was also the use of sort of biomarkers, or maybe studying to see what's sort of going on from a biological point of view. But I guess that's another story for another day. But I want to sort of get your thoughts. I mean, you've done the research, and obviously, Peter's sort of very influential in the field and experienced, and to have the opportunity to sort of to work alongside someone with that much experience, and it must be amazing. And what are your thoughts yourself on depression based on the research that you guys did? How do you sort of see it? I know it's an abstract question, but generally speaking,
abstract. I think this research, well, obviously working with someone like Peter, it's great because you get their insight. And I think what me and I kind of think is that it changed from when we started the research to when now I've come out of it, and it's kind of changed my opinion, because I went into it kind of thinking we should change labels, not have any labels, and not label our experiences. We should just say what we're experiencing, which could be low mood, or we don't feel like there's any hope for the future, because I thought that labels like major depressive disorder were more harmful. But what we actually found coming out of this research is that there's a difference in naming the problem and identifying the problem as a symptom of an illness. So, the problem isn't people's naming over people's overwhelming sense of worry as anxiety. It's stating that it's a disorder that derives from an underlying pathology and a genetic condition. And I think that's now kind of my belief that I hold, that there is benefits from naming our problems. Everyone finds validation in knowing that you're not alone and that other people have experienced it. But I think there is an issue with naming it as a disorder. And I think that's really what's changed my perspective.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think you've made some really, really good points there. Some valid points, and some interesting insights in terms of the research you've done, and certainly Peter shared some really fascinating thoughts as well when I spoke to him on the show. In terms of, you've sort of touched on diagnostic labels there. I think they have, this is my opinion, I think that, it might have a, like everything really, it's probably got its pros and cons as well in some respects. But, from your point of view, what are your thoughts on diagnostic labels?
Well, with the traditional labels, like major depressive disorder and anxiety disorder, which are used now in the diagnostic manuals, by the NHS. I don't think that they're very helpful. I think, like I was saying before, that term disorder represents the idea that it's an underlying deficit and a pathology, and I don't think that's a helpful way of thinking about it. I think that, obviously I do think the pros is that we can name things and that people find validation, but maybe we should use labels that represent our individual experience, because things like depression, it's caused by our own circumstances, our own life events. So surely we should have a label or a way of talking about it that incorporates that and doesn't so much favour, one view.
Yes.
So I think that's my view on it, really. But
yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that obviously you've been doing the research and that's sort of no doubt you'll sort of carry on researching and obviously Peter's been very influential in the field and he makes some really, really great points there. The only thing I would say, Millissa, is I guess with the labels you get some sort of standardisation in diagnosis across different treatment providers. In one sense, so for example, you've got a base to work with. I suppose the drawback is you may get over-diagnosis as well, but I think the challenge obviously in depression, and I don't profess to be a clinical expert in depression, is that the spectrum where you've got, say, sub-threshold, someone might have constructs and have days where they don't feel so great, but then you might have the treatment-resistant person, no matter what they do, things don't seem to get better. And somewhere in between. But in terms of you've sort of been doing the research, you've sort of got to where you are now, and we've talked about the labels. But I suppose in one sense, do you think the labels possibly may be useful in say guiding research and maybe treatment and maybe sort of standardising across a broad range of areas? Would you sort of, weighing it up in the time you've been researching, would you say that you mentioned there, I think, in my words, not yours, I suppose, it could lead to stigmatisation. Do you think that may be the negatives of stigma and maybe even misdiagnosis and maybe even simplifying behaviour is something that we need to look at?
I think, personally, and what I've seen from doing the research and what I've read, is that, yes, labels, they do have a way of enabling us access to services and, providing treatment and communication. But as Peter's kind of suggested we should then change that system, because it is, although it seems standardised, for example, with major depressive disorder, there's so many symptoms that two people could have a diagnosis of major depressive disorder but have none of the same symptoms. So there's kind of already a problem with the standardisation.
Yes.
So I think it's kind of difficult to argue for one or the other, but I think what we've also found with this research is that the labels that you hear can have negative effects. So, for example, people who heard the term major depressive disorder in our study, they thought that, for example, antidepressants and electroconvulsive therapy would be the best option to help depression, which makes sense, because if you're thinking that, for example, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, you're more likely to want medication to target that. But then this can be quite concerning, because researchers have shown, like Joanna Moncrief, that antidepressants aren't all that effective and actually having harmful effects, like increasing anxious thoughts and suicidal thoughts. So I think there's harmful effects to having labels like major depressive disorder and diagnostic labels, and as you've just mentioned, labels can help aid communication. So I think it's about, as Peter suggested, changing the system, and obviously still including labels, like we used a label major depressive episode, which that's actually still in the diagnostic systems now, it's just not used. So we can use them, on doctors' forms. They could report depressive episode and the symptoms, but it's allowing for that individual experience rather than favouring one explanation, and we can still use that to communicate. So I think obviously I'm no expert as well, and I'm just learning as I go along, but I think they're kind of the things that I've picked up on. No,
you obviously picked up a lot, and I think it's really fascinating. No doubt our listeners are intrigued, and particularly after the Professor Kinderman interview, it was really fascinating, and so I guess from what you say there, and having spoken to Peter and sort of, I suppose these are sort of my interpretation of the research. The debate is that mental health is quite complex in one sense. So I suppose in one sense the DSM, one could make a point that it maybe oversimplifies human behaviour, and behaviour being on a continuum. I suppose we can all agree to that. So I suppose in one sense, you start having this sort of reductionist, reducing really complex problems without sort of simple solutions to sort of labels and so on and so forth. You could lose that sort of human element, and that's what I really found it fascinating when I spoke to Peter. We talked about the, like for example, brain inflammation being one theory now, but I suppose in one sense, I went away from that interview thinking, well, maybe it is the chicken or the egg. Who knows what happens first, and the and obviously there is the chance, because you're relying on someone's experience to be able to sort of map your criteria, for want of a better word, to a label. And I suppose it's always hard, Millissa, I think, to draw a parallel to physical health. Because I suppose, not that I'm a medical person, but if you went to, say, a GP because you were feeling tired and whatever, then they may investigate that through taking blood tests. And, for example, if someone was to have low blood sugar or high blood sugar, then you got those sort of biomarkers. And I suppose in mental health, you are relying on the person telling you about their experience. I mean, there is obviously research around what happens in the brain in mental health, but to my knowledge, it's not used in diagnosis, so to speak. But I suppose one point is, what was your aims, the rationale of the research? What did you guys sort of set off to do? What was the actual rationale itself?
So I think we wanted to firstly recognise the impacts that the terms such as major depressive disorder can have on individuals who are experiencing depression, on attitudes towards people. But we also wanted to kind of do a comparison and compare. For example, in the past, people have done a comparison of no label at all, and compare that with the effects of psychiatric diagnosis, like you said, major depressive disorder. Whereas we wanted to do something a little bit different. As I said before, we wanted to more follow the lines that naming the illness is naming it as depression isn't the problem; it's naming it as an illness. So we sort of did. I'd like to say unique. I hope it's unique, because that's what I've been saying. But it's like a unique three-way comparison. So we compared no label and just the description of the symptoms or experiences. We compared that with a major depressive disorder label, which is at current what we use, and then we compared it with, as I mentioned before, it called depressive episode. So it's a label, but it's not one that's favouring any viewpoint, and we wanted to see which one, the differential impacts between them on the public's attitudes towards someone with depression.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say, and I think that I suppose on the other side of things, I mean, one thing I certainly took away from the conversation with Professor Kinderman was the stigmatisation as well that can come with a label to the sort of stigma that people sort of face as well, and obviously mental health. I suppose my sense is there may be multiple pathways to various mental health issues, whether it is a theory or whatever it is. But I suppose on the other side too, one thing to think about, Millissa, I was thinking, is obviously there are organic conditions that can cause mood disorders. So, for example, if someone's got, say, a thyroid or celiac or conditions like that can also cause anxiety and sort of depression too, and it also could be a comorbidity of another condition too. And in that sense, I think that I know this is outside the scope of your research, but do you sort of not think that maybe it might be important for the person to sort of to have a holistic approach and see if it is a biological, it could be an organic condition, it could be a condition that could be treated by a medical person if it was. Do you think it's important?
Of course.
Yeah,
of course. I think what this is kind of hard to say, but this research and my view isn't that I have no doubt that biological factors can play a role. As you said, thyroid problems. I think it's an underactive thyroid is linked with depression because you've got less energy and things like that. But what it's saying is that depression is a symptom of a thyroid. It's not an illness.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And it's more thinking that instead of having a label like major depressive disorder, which just suggests biological, it's having a label that incorporates, like you said, a holistic view, so everything. So it could be, for an individual, a biological cause like thyroid. It could be that, the social adversity as a child, they might have been brought up in poverty.
Absolutely,
it could be that they've, experienced loss or trauma, or just come back from war and experiencing severe trauma. I think that's the point, is that we're trying to find a label that incorporates all of that and doesn't cut out any explanation. Yes,
obviously, and that's no doubt that's a challenge in itself. But obviously, what you guys are working really well, and no, absolutely, keep going. And what methods did you guys use to do the research, to conduct the research?
Yeah, so we did an online questionnaire just with members of the public, and basically they were separated into those 3 groups, and they read a vignette, which is just essentially a description of symptoms that corresponded with depression. And the only difference between the 3 groups was the first one had no label, it was just that description. The second one was, Mary, that was the person in the thing, has major depressive disorder, and then the same symptoms. And then the third one was Mary's experiencing a depressive episode and the same symptoms. So the point was to see if just the labels or the absence of a label affected people's attitudes towards someone experiencing depression. Because after they'd read that, they all completed the same questionnaires. And what we was looking at is if it affected what they believed was causing the depression, how effective they thought the common treatments, so like antidepressants or therapy would be, their willingness to socially engage with the person in the vignette, so whether that's, would they employ Mary, would they live with Mary, would they like Mary to babysit their children, and then also how likely they thought Mary was to recover from feeling anxious or feeling depressed. And we wanted to just see them individual effects from the differential labels that we used.
That's really interesting stuff. And sort of really fascinating stuff what you guys did there. And so in terms of the impact of the label, would you say, I know in the short time we have, we could speak forever really, but in terms of what would you say in brevity for our listeners was the impact of labels based on the research you guys did?
So what we found, we found some surprising results actually. So first of all, we did find that each of the labels have their own individual effects on the attitudes. So as I mentioned before, people that heard the major depressive disorder label thought that antidepressants and ECT would be the best option to help depression. So it kind of influenced the treatment choices. Also, we found that people who heard that major depressive disorder label were actually less empathetic to people who were depressed. So they were more likely to think that forcing treatments, whether that was psychiatric care against their own will, was more acceptable. And this kind of supports what I said earlier, is that terms like disorder, which represent the concept that depression is a mental illness, allows people to think that, oh, there's something wrong with them, and you know, it's like a less humane approach to people. But what we also found, which was really unique to this study and what we didn't really predict, is that when we asked people how likely do you think Mary is to recover from a depression, it was actually having no label that had the most hope. We thought that, you know, the major depressive disorder label
yes
would, do you know what I mean? Like, it had the opposite effect in a way. So it's kind of following the idea that there is consequences to naming it as a disorder, but there's also consequences of not naming it at all, because I think people validate themselves and see themselves as having something that they can recover from in a way. So it was quite surprising what we found in that way, and it's kind of shaped, I think, my view a bit differently.
You know, it's really interesting, and I suppose in one sense, sort of, we look at, say, genes, environment, sort of correlation to obviously, you know, many different things, and certainly in depression. So, for example, some of the research around genes and the monozygotic twins, so they got 100% the same genes, and one goes on to get depression, one doesn't. One experiences life adverse events, and that seems to be the light switch, so to speak, for genes. But I mean, certainly from what you're saying there, what's really fascinating, and obviously the work that Professor Kinderman's been doing, and obviously yourself has been very fortunate enough to sort of you know, be learning with him, sort of, it does open things up, and you start to think, well, okay, I think it's really important to have these discussions and sort of talk about this research, because obviously at least, you know, we're a long way off from I think, in my opinion, from a research point of view, you know, being really, really clear. But I think in treating the individual, like you've mentioned, is a really important thing, and sort of reducing stigmas as well is a key thing. And I'm sort of mindful of sort of time. It's gone really quick, but sort of going forward, is there any sort of last words? What's the next step for you guys going forward? Just, you know,
I think the next step is to really carry on what we've been doing, and try and do more research to highlight that, you know, the language that we use when we are talking about these mental health problems, whether that's anxiety or depression, it really does matter.
Yes.
And it's not taken away from the idea that depression is a very real experience, but it's putting forward that maybe it should be understood as an individual experience. So that makes then sense that the language that we use, whether that's in the public or in clinical assessment or in our record systems, should welcome methods that allow for individual experience and don't favour, you know, biological causes or psychological. They favour all approaches because, like you said, it's an individual viewpoint. So I think we're really just pushing for that change in the way that we think about mental health, like Peter was talking about with his manifesto for mental health. And I think this is just a small, you know, chip in that, but I'm just going to hopefully carry on trying to, you know, push for a change in the language, really.
Absolutely. It's been really fascinating, and no doubt our listeners have really found it interesting, and it's been great for you to come on board the show, Millissa. We really want to thank you for coming aboard the show. 94.4 FM, the Friday sports show for your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you all the news from local area and the world. In our segment, we talk to people in the field of psychology. That was Millissa Booth, who's a student at Liverpool University, who's been involved in research with Professor Kinderman, who's been on the show as well. Really, really fascinating insights into the research she's been doing, and we really want to thank you for coming on board the show, Millissa. Know that we'll hear more of your research in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a great experience.
Thank you. And around the world, we're very fortunate in this show to have guests from all around the world in sport, different capacities: trainers, coaches, footballers, psychologists. You name it, the world's best athletes have been on the show. We've also got the segment, not so new now, speaking to psychologists, some of the leading psychologists in the field who've sort of talked about their work and their research. Today we've got a really fascinating guest, a very talented person who's going to speak about what they do outside football, art, and this is really, really fascinating. Some of the drawings are fascinating. I've seen some of these drawings as well, so we're going to sort of go into a bit more detail. But our next guest was a promising footballer, had a distinguished career, and no doubt he'll sort of give us more of an insight into what he does. So, Ricky Anane, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no, great to have you on board. And I mean, our listeners, many of our listeners follow non-league. I'm sure there's plenty of listeners who's probably played against you. A tough player to play against. Obviously, we'd worked together at a time at Bury, and promising player. I remember you getting a game against Rochdale. What a game that was to play. And I mean, in terms of your career, you've played in non-league, you've been at Workington, Fleetwood, Droylsden, Woking as well. You've played abroad as well. I mean, what was your aspirations, Ricky? How would you sort of summarise your sort of career in general? For any sort of aspiring footballer, you've sort of, you've sort of managed to play for different teams and travel. And what would you say to any young footballer coming through? Any sort of tips or insights into how best they can get a chance to play football at the best level they can?
Yeah, obviously this is number one. It's hard work. Just listen to your peers and try and take advice from older players, but also important to have a mind of your own. Just be confident in your ability as well, and it's a tough sport, football. You know what I mean? It's like if you're always comparing yourself to everyone else, but if you can just concentrate on yourself, work as hard as you can, and then play to the best of your ability, and then you can just go as far as you can. Say, well, you can go as far as you like, but yeah, you've got to be disciplined and work hard and just stick at it. And every day is different in football. I mean, week to week, as you know, Jimmy.
Yeah.
And things can change so fast. All you need really is that one good consistent season. Yeah. And you can literally put it into this you won't believe. So yeah, but definitely be confident, and then just as hard work.
Absolutely. I mean, it is. I mean, you mentioned a really good point there for any of our young listeners who play football. It is tough, and on your day, Ricky, you could hold your own against anybody, and you could have easily played at the highest level without a shadow of a doubt. And we know in football, obviously, you need a bit of luck too, and injuries and stuff like that comes into it, and just selection too. And obviously, it's just it's a difficult career path, football. Obviously, so many people everyone wants to play and be a professional footballer, but there's only so many places. And with yourself, I mean, obviously, you bounced back and you won. I think it was North West County's Player of the Year. And did you feel in your own mind? Did you have aspirations to go back pro again, Ricky? Were you sort of happy with the way things? You just in terms of yourself, in terms of what were your thoughts? Obviously, you did really well at Woking too. Did you sort of have aspirations to go back pro, or did you sort of decide, you know what, I'll stay at this level and sort of look at other things?
Yeah, no, definitely. Obviously, when I got released from Bury, my aspirations were to try and get back to a professional level as quick as possible. I went down to Woking, and that was probably one of the best clubs I've played at, without a shadow of a doubt. Everyone down there was unbelievable. Manager at the time, Graham Baker, and his assistant, Jimmy Dack. The fans were unbelievable. So Jimmy had aspirations to get back as quickly as possible, but I think as I got to like 23, 24, I kind of realised that it may not happen, because before that I had a pretty good season where I thought if it didn't happen then, I don't know when it's going to happen, kind of thing. So I had to really come to a realisation myself that maybe you might not go back to the level you want to be at, but just enjoy the level you're playing at, which you did. And like I said, it opened my eyes, and it's definitely playing in the league. There's some really, really, really good players down there that should be playing higher, but like you say, you need a bit of luck and timing in football, and I guess it didn't really happen to me in a sense, the luck part, but I definitely enjoyed playing where I played, without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, interesting you say. I mean, from say like a mental point of view, We talk a lot about mental health these days. There's more awareness. Still got a long way to go. For a young player like yourself, who we could easily be having this conversation now, and you're playing, in the Championship or even the Premiership. Who knows? You held your own as a young player against any team. And what's it like, that sort of realization? Obviously, you sort of you sort of seem to have taken it well. You've moved on, and you do the best you can. But what's it like when you have that realization that it may not work out for me?
Go through a few stages, if I'm honest. For one, you think you're letting everyone down because everyone's like, you'll get back there. You should be playing here. You should be playing there. So you feel like a bit of a letdown, and you end up putting so much pressure on yourself. So why are you not at that level? Why is it not happening? And you can go down. Luckily for me, you didn't really go down the road, but you can go down the road where you're getting down, depressed. It's affecting you long term, and then it's like, oh, now I've got to get a job, working 9 to 5, which you didn't think you may have to do at the time, but it's just a whole other path where you just there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. If when you go up from full time, from full time to part time, it's a big transition. If you've been in the football background for quite a couple of seasons, and it's not an easy transition, but it's doable. You just don't put any advice to give people. Just don't put too much pressure on yourself. It's easier said than done. But honestly, it's no good for your mental state. The amount of pressure you put yourself under.
Absolutely, and
the realization that it may not work out.
Yeah, no, that's some sort of great insight, really, from someone who's been there and done that. And I must admit, in my experience of sort of coaching in sort of non-league, it was sort of new to me. I sort of started helping out in the beginning, but I guess in one sense I sort of fell back in love with the game working in non-league, because it was like the people played with so much sort of passion, and it wasn't. Don't get me wrong, obviously they do a professional too, but the people in the game at non-league, they really want to be there. The love for the game is there. Did you find that yourself, Ricky, that sort of the non-league, so you sort of look around and think, wow, so many people do so much hard work behind the scenes. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, of course. It's like a lot of people, they do voluntary work, but they don't really get paid. They're putting so much work in behind the scenes to keep the club running, and it's just amazing what the people who are not people not playing the game, what they're doing outside of the club. They're coming to do the food vans, the turnstiles, making the programs, and they're getting next to nothing if they're getting anything. And I just thought, just the pure love of that, then as a player makes you want to go out and just give that little bit more. So when you get the 3 points, it's not just you getting the 3 points, it means a lot more to the people who do so much hard work behind the scenes, which I thought I didn't really, when I was in full time, obviously not disrespect to Barry or anything, you don't really notice too much because you kind of too much in it, if that makes sense. And then when you go drop down a few leagues, you just notice how much hard work people do.
Absolutely.
And how much 3 points actually means to these people. So it was definitely, Jimmy, you're right on that. I did think a lot more people put 100%. From what I see, and even the players who work, they work a job and then they come straight to football, and you can tell they just want to be there because they're not non-league unless obviously you manage to sort out some kind of very good contract. Again, you're not getting paid a lot depending on your level. So you actually want to be there and you want to play, and they're just giving 110%, which is it's good thing to see.
And that's it's what you're saying. I mean, for a player like yourself who's got good technical ability, pace, and I mean the non-league. One of the things that sort of surprised me in the non-league was the physicality. I have to admit, my first stint coaching the non-league was a big eye-opener. I felt you could bring technical players in and sort of walk the league, but it was a massive eye-opener. Obviously, in the summer months when the sort of the pitches are all nice and sort of green, everything's sort of perfect. But then you get to like December, January, and some of the players that were released from professional clubs, just the physicality, Ricky, was just incredible. It was a massive eye-opener. How did you find it, obviously for yourself, sort of to be playing, in that sort of physicality?
Yeah, because obviously, coming from very a bit especially when you get ignorance in non-league, which is disrespectful to say, but you are a little bit. And when I went to Woking, and I just remember as you know, Jimmy was the biggest lad, best of times. So I did get bashed about the park a bit, which I did have to get used to. I had to use my body better. But it was when I went to North West County, and I think I played his first game. I think I was in about 22, and just how hit and rush it was.
Wow.
And I thought I'd have more time on the ball. I think the first game I played, I'd definitely give myself a 1 out of 10 for performance.
Wow, yeah.
The shit, I thought I had more time on the ball, and you literally had no time. As soon as you got the ball, someone was on you, and it's just nothing I've ever experienced playing, which it did take me 3 or 4 games to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to you, you adapted and would go on to be, was it Player of the Year? You got the award Player of the Year?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's a massive achievement to sort of, to sort of adapt and do that. And for yourself to, I mean, what did it mean to you to sort of achieve that, Ricky? Did you feel that was sort of, that was a reflection of the hard work you'd put in and just hanging in there?
Yeah, it was, when I got told, first of all, I didn't believe the person that told me. I was like, whatever, just winding me up. Right. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. When he said no, it's honestly, I was just a bit taken back, to be fair. I didn't know how to take that, but now saying it, now looking back, it was definitely something that reflected after the hard work you put in, because I never really won anything team-wise, unfortunately. It's one to make you regret. But individually, because it was a nice little touch, and I was quite proud of myself, to be fair.
Did you have any teams sort of knocking on door? Any professional teams sort of looking around, thinking we'll sort of take a chance, or did anything materialise in that area, Ricky, at the time?
To be fair, not that I know. The games you hear.
Yeah, exactly.
In the grapevine, but never anything materialised from it. And I just got to the stage where I thought, if there was interest like that, surely they'd just come and speak to me and then go from there. But nothing I can say, X club was interested and said this. And I'd say about the time I got to that stage, I was just playing for enjoyment, really.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't really do as much when I was younger, because I was chasing to get back professionally.
Yeah.
So, I just thought I'm just going to enjoy myself now and just see what happens.
And absolutely, it's a good attitude to have, because, like he says, in the end you just end up putting extra pressure on yourself, and that's not good, obviously, to do that. But I mean, at the time, like he says, I mean, it's a great achievement to sort of show and hang in there. You see a lot of players come into the non-league from pro, and they end up sort of giving the game away, because it is difficult. But I suppose that shows your passion for the game and love for the game, which is really, really important. It's just football being one of those things. Timing as well is a big thing, and all that sort of stuff. But sort of reflecting on your art, I don't sort of go on social media very much, to be honest. It's I sort of have someone generally manage it for me. I have a page, Money for My Business page, but I sort of caught a glimpse of, I think you sent me an invite one time, and I clicked on it, and I thought, wow, some of the art was incredible. I thought, gee, and it's amazing stuff. And I mean, speaking of the art, I mean, at what point were you aware you could draw like that, Ricky? It's just fascinating to me how.
So in school, I was always big on art in school, but I wasn't. In the art subject, I didn't do things I liked to draw. Those subjects and the topics and things that you had to do for coursework and etc.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I was never really interested in stuff. I didn't pass that. I got a D, and then I think when I left school, I didn't really draw that much. Tried to pick it back up in my spare time when I was better when you come home, you have a bit of spare time, but again, it was just doodling. Nothing too major. And it was really when I think I was at Stockport Sports time, I must have been about 22, 23.
Yeah.
I was in a bit of a lull because, like I say, I was chasing to get back professionally. Wasn't really what happening. And I wouldn't say it went into like a deep depression, but I was borderline, just very quite low, and things weren't really happening outside of football or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I just got my mum's house with a pen and a piece of paper, and I just started doodling. And I thought, this is, I'm enjoying doing this. So I was watching videos on YouTube, etc. And don't get me wrong, Jimmy, at the start, I thought I can draw anything. That was totally wrong. I was terrible at drawing certain things.
Wow.
But I thought, you know what, I'm going to stick at it, and I'm going to learn, research, and just see what happens. And then, so throughout years, I just got more confident, started painting things, and then the last year or so, I've finally managed to pencil draw portraits, which is something I've been wanting to do for years. I didn't think I'd be able to do it.
Yeah.
And now I've got to a stage where I'm happy with, but there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
But literally, it just eases my mind. It takes my mind off everything that's happening. But previously, it just takes my mind. I'm at ease, I play a bit of music, I just draw, and time just flies.
Yeah, no,
you don't realise, and then, it's just, it's just really, I kind of just fell into it, really, and just took it from there.
No, it's fascinating stuff, and I sort of had the impression that maybe you'd always sort of, done art and drawing, and I didn't realise it was something you sort of picked up. Like, it sort of goes to show, I mean, I don't like to ever go at the academics. Teachers sort of work really hard, don't get me wrong, they've got a curriculum to teach, but it just goes to show that there's so much talent in so many areas that sometimes gets to miss, really. If you didn't sort of take, if you didn't sort of take that opportunity to sort of to sort of focus your drive in sort of doing art, then obviously that would have been sort of a chance missed, really. And sometimes I think that creativity or creative subjects don't really get much attention. And in terms of yourself, I mean, some of the pictures, to be fair, are incredible. I mean, I'm not an expert, but looking at it from the outside, I think, wow, obviously sort of you draw a lot of different people. And like, when you draw, I mean, what do you do? Do you have a strategy yourself? Do you sort of pen and paper and I've tried to draw myself, but it never quite works out that way. I mean, what do you do, Ricky? There must be something in your mind, that sort of some sort of photography memory to be able to do that. I mean, is it something sort of you sketch first of all, or how does it work?
Yeah, so what I do first of all is I just blank piece of A4 paper, and then I get the picture or the portrait I want to draw, and use the proportions. I'll draw a grid on the piece of paper.
Yeah.
So, say 2 inches by 2 inches grid, and then put the grid onto the A4 piece of paper, and then literally just line everything up from what you can see in the grid.
Yeah.
To get all the proportions right. And then what I do then is transfer the sketch I've done on the A4 paper myself onto a bit of more nice paper if I'm doing a portrait for someone who wants to wants to edit, just so the lines are clean, because at the first I was sketching straight onto the better paper, because I was doing a lot of erasing. You could see it on the paper, so it wasn't really a great finished quality, but over time I just learned to transfer the image that I've drawn. So basically, even if I don't put the image onto the final piece of paper, I'll just sketch as many as possible. I've got a file that's just got loads of line drawings of portraits that if I need to do one, I just pull them out.
Yeah.
Go from there, but that's how I managed to get as accurate as possible drawing freehand. So. Yeah,
no, it's incredible. Yeah. And sort of, I mean, do you do it now like as a hobby or a business, or is that sort of the direction you're taking it yourself? I mean, the quality is really good.
It's a bit of both, Jimmy. It's a hobby, but then if I get an inbox on Facebook or Instagram to say, can you draw this person for me, I'll pay you, then by all means. But definitely first, it's a hobby, and I want to keep it as that, because remember, I started playing football as a hobby.
Yeah.
And down the line, it got too serious. you know what it's like.
Exactly.
So I want to keep this as a hobby because I enjoy doing it. And then, like I say, if things happen and I end up being able to do it full time, great. But now I know I'm a lot older now and a bit more mentally stable and understand things a lot more. I know how to deal with this a lot better than what I did with football.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing as well too. I suppose on the other side of things too, it gives you sort of something, an outlet to sort of focus on as well. And I mean, it's a positive one too, to be able to sort of you lose yourself and just do. And have you had any sort of feedback? You sort of draw famous people too, I've noticed. Has anyone ever got in touch or anything like that? Probably will after the show. So anyone listening, we've got to give you details out there. Has anyone sort of ever got in touch and sort of or anything like that, or just generally speaking, it's been under the radar?
Still under the radar at the moment. No one has noticed yet. But yeah, like I say, if you do, it's a bonus. But like I say, let's see what happens really. But yeah, I just enjoy doing it. So like I say, if anybody I do draw who his name does see it and obviously I don't know, share it or whatever, it's unbelievable. But yeah, it's for the time being, no one has yet. But yeah, like I say, I just enjoy doing it. And it's mainly icons I like drawing, people who mean a lot to me. Not mean a lot to me, but who I kind of inspired by stuff like that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and so in terms of so people get in touch as well sometimes to sort of inquire about having a drawing. I mean, obviously, people sometimes, when they go away on holiday, for example, you get people do drawings. Do you get people who sort of ask you to do drawings of them as well, or just the general?
Yeah, so it's been like friends and family, and then I've had quite a few people who I don't know. So to me, that was quite a big deal because sometimes friends and family they can just support you even if something's not that great sometimes because they just want to support you.
Yes.
But when it was something like
extra pressure.
Yeah, who I didn't know, I was like, oh right. So they're just seeing art. They don't know me as a character or anything like that. They just see the art and think, oh,
absolutely,
I'm interested. So yeah, I think about 2 years ago I was just mainly doing painting, but I was doing a lot of I wouldn't say abstract, but it was just different kind of painting. And yeah, I had quite a bit of interest about 2 years ago, which was good from people I didn't know. Yeah. And then now I've changed it. I'm trying to go down the more pencil sketch route. And it's been interesting here and there, which is good. It just it gives you a bit of confidence, sometimes, because I remember the first time I posted anything on social media. Stupidly enough, I way overthinked it. I can't post it on there because, as you know, Jimmy, social media doesn't bring positive feedback. It can bring negative feedback. And I was just like, I'm still a bit insecure at the time with drawings and stuff. If someone said the wrong thing, I made it crumble, which is bad to say. But yeah, so I thought, no, going through it. A good friend, Sean, he was pushing me to do it, and then I thought, it's out there, and then it's been okay. I'm happy I can negative feedback, but you can't please everyone.
No, that's a good point. It's a great point you've made there. I'm glad you made that point because there's a lot of people out there, young people, people of any age really, who, like you've mentioned there, and you'd be surprised as well. Some people I speak to, so they're very good at what they do, but there's that sort of fear of putting it out there, of being sort of the comments and the judgments, because people can sit behind their keyboard and obviously in the comfort of their own home, the keyboard warrior type thing.
And they can come out in force,
exactly.
I think they're just there to try and destroy people, but I just think whatever anyone's doing, if I don't know, we've been in lockdown for so long, they may have come up with something that, they create something creatively. It doesn't even mean to be a masterpiece. Whatever you've created, if you're proud of it, post it.
Absolutely, that's a great point. For sure.
Yeah, just be proud of what you've created because it takes a lot of courage to even start anything, and then to post it. And unfortunately, as life is, you're going to get people that are going to say negative stuff.
No, that's a really great point.
And then,
it's an inspiring point for people looking to do something, and I can relate to that. A few years ago, I decided to sort of dabble back in music again, and I like doing tunes and that sort of stuff. And the first tune I did, I'd spent so many hours trying to put it together, and I bought so much expensive equipment to do it and that sort of stuff out of my own pocket. I thought, let's do it, get it out there, and some of the feedback I got, on the whole, it was good, but some of the feedback I got was like scathing. I thought, wow, I'm like, wow, do people actually exist? I'm like, wow, But then, like he says, it's one of them. I always look at who's doing the criticising, and it's water off a duck's back. I think, well, at the end of the day,
exactly.
It's whatever.
Yeah, definitely. Something I've learned as I've grown older.
Yeah.
It's just like, whatever. Probably 10 years ago, I would have done another drawing if someone would have said, oh, that's no good. You know what I mean? But now it's like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's projection, people sort of projecting their own, and I think that just to get that sense of significance, it's easy to tear someone down. From behind from the comfort of a keyboard, really, and that's the sort of sad thing sometimes that stops people who have got so many great ideas they'd like to share. But like he says, that's on the other side of things, I think sometimes what does happen too, for every one person, it's a small minority. We forget about the majority of people who do sort of appreciate it as well, and that's a big thing too. But it's like, I suppose one thing that you learn in football and is obviously people have got various opinions, and you just got to stay focused on your game and see what happens.
I'd say definitely football has helped me out a lot in that. But you just said it is literally a game of opinions. And you will deal with a lot of rejection in football, whether you like it or not. And if you can obviously keep bouncing back from them rejections, it helps you later on in life outside of football. Yeah. So you can just, I don't know, for example, just for example out there, I don't know, you might ask somebody out. No. And it's like, okay, you just carry on. You don't get the job you want, you get rejection. Okay. Yeah. And you just got to keep bouncing back, and that's definitely one thing in football that I took from it.
Absolutely. That's a great sentiment to have, and certainly any young footballers listening, and whether they sort of turn their attentions to a different profession or do something alongside, like you did as well, just to sort of start as a hobby and see what happens. And in terms of getting in touch, what do you have, like the contact, the social media pages people can see more? Our listeners are interested to maybe see and learn a bit more about your work.
Definitely. I'll spell it out. It's just my surname, so Anane, which is ANANE. _24.
Absolutely. I certainly, recommend the listeners have a look at some of the drawings that you do, the artwork. It's fascinating, and I think what's even more fascinating is how you've mentioned that it all just started by, putting pen or pencil to paper and studying and working hard, learning off where you could to go forward. So. It's powerful stuff, but it's been really fascinating. That listeners have sort of enjoyed an insight and certainly taken something away from you sharing your experiences in football and the world of art as well. I'll certainly be keeping an eye out for the artwork that you do as well, Ricky. So it's great to have you on the show, Ricky. Wish you all the very best going forward, and no doubt we'll sort of see more of your art coming through
100%.
soon.
Thanks a lot.
Fantastic. That was Ricky Anane speaking about his art, and a very talented footballer, extremely talented footballer, and that's the way football is sometimes. It doesn't work out for every footballer. It's a very competitive game and so many few places, but it is a testimony that for any young players listening, or any players of any age and coaches, that you just got to bounce and keep going forward and look for other things as well that can help take our mind off things, if nothing else, as a hobby. And then see where the road takes you. But certainly recommend having a look at the Facebook page and the drawings. They're absolutely incredible. So 94.4 FM Salford City Radio Friday Sports FC, Jimmy Petruzzi, your host. As always, feel free to email us on our Facebook page any questions, comments, otherwise about today's show or any other show that we've sort of covered on the radio show.